question from Adolfo, who asks, Chewy, sometimes online I hear black belts suggest train with intention. What exactly does that mean to you? I'm never really clear what this means by train with intention. And so he sends me that message. Adolfo, thank you for the question. And train with intention is very simple. Just replace the word intention with focus or purpose, right? You're stepping onto the mat and you have an intention, you have a focus, you have a purpose for being there, and you're going after something very intentionally, right? This is one of the reasons why, and this is, by the way, this is a really good tip. I would suggest probably 9 out of 10 black belts would agree with me. This is probably one of the best things that you can do for your game as far as progressing in jiu-jitsu if you want to progress faster. Train with intention. It's harder to do because you've got to be focused more. It's not as relaxing of a role, but it's important. Like, for instance, years ago when I was becoming a coach, I started diving into all these different books on learning and teaching and coaching and just sports and stuff in general and skill acquisition. And one of the books that I read early on was called Talent is Overrated. And inside the book, it talked about this idea of deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice is something I've used over and over again, but I never really had a name for it. But deliberate practice, and the idea behind it was focusing on something very intentionally, which is going to require a lot more focus from you, but in turn will make you better. And one of the examples that the guy used was talking about a musician. So let's say that a musician was playing a song and the song's going da-da-da-da-da, no problem. And then once they get to this certain point of the song, they have trouble playing that instrument, that note, or those notes associated with this part of the song. If the person wants to get better at playing that song, do they want to just play the whole song through, like play it, or I guess I'm doing a violin, right? But play it, or do they want to focus on this one little area? Well, in the book, they were saying that a lot of these musicians would focus on that area that they're trying to work on, that they're trying to improve on, and they would just keep playing it over and over and over again into the points to that, basically the areas that were tough for them that's going to stretch them, right? Opposed to simply just playing through everything. And so I started doing this where I incorporated a lot of situational drilling with my students and rolling with my students to make sure that we were focusing on these areas that we were training with in the class. So for instance, if we went in to do full guard sweeps, for instance, I'm going to start the class in full guard and give them a chance to actually use this stuff, opposed to just letting them do whatever they want to do. And you can think about this, right? Because a lot of times, we will practice different moves. But if we're left to just do a full roll, a lot of times, unless you have an intention of making that move work, a lot of times we revert back to whatever's comfortable. We're playing the whole song instead of playing that little area that maybe we want to work on. Now, that's kind of an idea for you. Now, as far as the intention could be a myriad of different things. Your intention could be a technical or positional idea, right? Like, so for instance, leading up to the no-gi pans that I did about a month ago, I was focused on a very particular set of moves leading up to that competition. By the way, this is one of the reasons why I think competitions and things like this can be really useful for people, because it sort of artificially, well, not artificially, but it creates this thing that's coming up that sort of spurs this intention for people, that makes them more focused on their training because they have this event coming up. And I was able to use those techniques in competition. The other thing it can be a sort of mindset intention, right? Like back in the day when I was a white belt, I remember I used to get really frustrated because I wasn't very good on my back. And when I would try a couple sweeps, a lot of times people would begin passing and I would, defend a little bit, but then I would get really frustrated and I would just lose my head. And then they would get to side control and I would get frustrated. And so I knew that I was getting frustrated. So I set an intention coming into class of not allowing myself to get frustrated by it, right? Like staying cool, calm, and collected, figuring my way through it. It can also be something where, maybe you're avoiding a training partner. I remember years ago when I first came to this gym, one of the head coaches had a nasty triangle, right? Disgustingly good triangle. And I remember there was one day where the mats are open, we're all grabbing partners, and I started to kind of veer off to the side. And I remember thinking, like, I'm being a wimp. I'm wimping out of this situation. And right here, I have a guy who's really good, and I could get really good from rolling with him. And I beelined it for him. And I made an intention every single day that I came into the gym to roll with him, because, I spent an inordinate, I spent way too much time in that man's crush than I care to admit, because I got triangled over and over again. But it made me better long term, and so I was making myself roll with him. And it took me like a year and a half to finally figure out that triangle. But I made sure I rolled with him every time I trained because I wanted to make sure I was getting better. And I knew that he was tough. He really exposed a lot of my weaknesses, so I needed to go there. So you can think about that. Maybe you have someone in the gym that they just have your number and you try to avoid them, go roll with them. But again, the intention can be whatever you want it to be. But the idea is setting something intentional for your training to make you better. And again, this is one of the best training tips that you can take away because, like, for instance, when I talk to friends of mine that are black belts and people that are really good, I can ask them, hey, what are you working on right now? And I guarantee you they'll give me a move. They'll give me a set of techniques. They'll give me a position. They have something that they are working on intentionally. They're not just going onto the mat and saying, oh, let's just see what happens, right? Now, one caveat is that you can sometimes do that, right? Sometimes it's nice to just turn your brain off and just flow and go with, see whatever happens, right? Just kind of go with the flow. But if you're trying to get better actively, you want to have a focus when you're stepping on the mat. You don't want to simply step on the mat and say, yeah, let's see what happens. You want to say, this is what I'm working on, or this is what I'm going to try to do today, and then you make that happen. And so that's the idea. That's the idea for you, Adolfo. If you're going to train with intention, when they're talking about it, it just means step on the mat with a purpose or something you're focused on. And again, it's a really good suggestion and something you should definitely incorporate in your training if you're not already doing so. But again, the sort of focus could be something technical or positionally, could also be something mindset or otherwise. One little thing I'll add on, one little bonus for you at the end of this video is that if you're going to focus on a position or a technique, break that down into a more granular level and say, okay, if this is the position or the technique that I'm shooting for, what are the grips that I need? And that would be what I would shoot for. Because for me, like when I think about using a technique, I'll think about, okay, this is the technique that I'm trying to use. Let's say it's half guard. I'm trying to use my bottom half guard. Okay, well, what do I need to make that work? I need an underhook, and I need to have positionally my leg hooked over top of theirs in the particular way that I hold it. Those are my two first things. Those are the things I'm trying to get to first, and everything else happens from there. And you can kind of think about that whenever position or technique you're looking at. Think about what grips you need to make it work, and then you search for those grips when you're rolling and be very intentional about trying to get those. So a couple ideas for you, Adolfo. Hope that helps. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.